Okay, colleagues, shall we? It's time, I think. So, shall we make a start? Welcome, everybody, and welcome to those of you who are joining us, observers this morning, and colleagues from the media. I think we're now recording and live. So, welcome everybody to our Full Fire Authority meeting, Friday the 14th of July. Thank you to colleagues here at Highfield Station for hosting us this morning, and welcome to everybody. I'm going to move straight into the formal business for the agenda. So the first item we've got today is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Chair, apologies from Police Crime Commissioner Caroline Henry.
Thank you very much. Any other apologies for absence? Councillor Hollis?
No, apologies for councillors as well, we've got a family issue.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Any other apologies? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 2 then is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from any members or officers in relation to any items on the agenda? No, I haven't seen any indications. Thank you, colleagues. Item 3 then is the minutes of our meeting held on the 27th of May 2023 for confirmation. Any comments or questions in relation to the minutes, which are on the yellow pages in our agenda pack? Are colleagues happy to approve them as an accurate record? They agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 4 then is Chair's announcements. First of all, I just want to start off by talking about the awful incidents that took place in the city in the middle of June. So last month, on the Tuesday the 13th of June, the service was mobilised to what turned out to be an incredibly sad and challenging major incident in Nottingham City, where 3 people were tragically killed. On behalf of both the fire service and the combined fire authority, we'd firstly like to express our incredible sadness at life on this day, and our thoughts go out to the families of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates. We'd also like to state our thanks and gratitude to all staff from not only the fire service, but from the police, Nottingham City Council and from all the other agencies who responded to the incident, with many teams and individuals moving courageously towards unknown danger to help others. And I think anybody who was watching through the lens of the media and the press on that day, not knowing what had happened and not knowing whether their loved ones were safe, will have been really proud of the work of our emergency services and our partner agencies who responded to this absolutely awful incident. Their selfless and professional actions demonstrated everything our organisation stands for, helping others in their time of need. Our thoughts also go out to the family of Kyle Knowles, who was also killed last month whilst on a tram approaching Highbury Vale on Monday the 26th of June. All of these deaths are absolutely tragic, and I know that the service is already working with partners to reassure and support members of our community as part of the recovery effort. Thankfully, these types of incidents are not ones that we attend daily, but I know the service has got a wide range of wellbeing support in place for the staff involved, and I hope anyone that feels they need it does choose to access their support. At this juncture, colleagues, I'm going to bring in Councillor Nick Rain, who I think just wants to make a brief comment, obviously as a City Councillor where the incident took place. Nick?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, I mean, I'd just like to echo our thanks to the City Council for all the services and the services that was provided on the day. Obviously, this is a tragic event for the City. We've had a number of tragic events. As you said, it's out of the ordinary. It was a remarkable event in many ways, and it was a remarkable event when we got together subsequently. We heard from the parents of Grace and Barnaby, and we heard from the family of Ian. Ian was a much valued public servant and a caretaker in the school, and obviously Grace and Barnaby were visitors to our city, and we're very, very saddened. But I thought the dignity that the family showed, the content of their speeches was very moving. Lots of people, we came together as a city, to say that this is unusual, and that we all stand together and obviously hopefully rise above it. And obviously the tragic event at Highbury Vale tram stop, which is in my council ward, was another awful event. And again, the police have in particular have acted on that quickly and swiftly, and we hope there'll be a swift conclusion to it. I won't comment because I think there's an ongoing investigation on that, but we'd like to extend our thanks to all those, and particularly the families who showed great dignity, I think, and the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rain, and I know that both the Chief, myself and colleagues from the Fire Service were in attendance at the Nottingham Together Vigil, and I thought it was a really, really lovely moment, dignity from the families, very, very powerful tributes to their loved ones in absolutely horrific circumstances, and a real sense of unity and compassion from the city, which is always what is needed in the wake of such horrific incidents. Sorry to say, colleagues, that the previous report wasn't the only piece of tragic news that we will have to report today in terms of Chair's announcements. As on Wednesday the 21st of June, the service was informed that a colleague of ours from our neighbouring West Midlands Fire Brigade had gone missing in the English Channel. Crew manager Ian Hughes, who joined the fire service in 1999, was attempting to swim the channel for charity when he went missing. Unfortunately, despite efforts of both the French and Belgian authorities, he couldn't be found and still hasn't been found. This is yet another tragedy, and whilst many of us may not have known Ian personally, he was a member of our wider fire family and was fundraising for the firefighters charity, a charity which obviously is close to the heart of very many people in this service. Following the news, we were asked to share a link to Ian's fundraising page in the hope that the fire sector could collectively beat Ian's fundraising target of £21,000 to the British Heart Foundation, the firefighters charity and the Midlands Air Ambulance. It's heartwarming to say that this target has been beaten and the fundraising total currently sits at, and I think is ticking up all the time, £55,000. The link can be shared and does remain live, so should anybody want to donate and add to the running total, please feel free to do so. Our thoughts go out to Ian's family and all our colleagues at West Midlands Fire Service, who we know are truly heartbroken about these horrific incidents. Colleagues, before I just go on to any further Chair's announcements, we will now have a minute's silence for Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar, Ian Coates, Kyle Knowles and Ian Hughes. Thank you very much, colleagues. Finally, in terms of Chair's announcements, we're extremely proud to once again be leading Nottingham Pride this year with a fire engine, as we have done in previous years. Pride is taking place. Welcome to attend. Colleagues across the service will be using the event to promote both fire safety and careers with us, and we know attendance has had a powerful impact previously. This is a huge day for the LGBTQ plus community and visibility for people right across Nottinghamshire, and we'd encourage as many staff and members as possible to attend. And just finally, colleagues, we do have a Strategic Inclusion Board meeting after today's Full Fire Authority. Obviously, all colleagues are welcome to attend, whether you're a named member of that board or not. Our staff networks are coming along, our equality staff networks, diversity and inclusion networks. A really good opportunity for members to interact with our staff, so please do come along at the end of today's meeting. Are there any comments or questions in relation to Chair's announcements? No? Okay, we'll move on to the first substantive item on the agenda, item 5 on our agenda, which is revised procurement thresholds. And I'll hand over to our Head of Finance and Treasurer, Becky Smithers.
Thank you, Chair. So the procurement thresholds do form part of the service's financial regulations, and this is the first of a part of a review, the first part of a review that will be bringing through to Fire Authority, as any changes to the financial regulations need authorising here. So the last time that this part of the standing orders were adjusted was back in 2012. So it's some time since they've been reviewed. So the purpose is really just to bring them up to date in line with current costs and inflation levels. So you'll see in the appendix we've got a suite of ranges with different thresholds that we need to meet and what the minimum level of contract requirements they are, ranging from up to £1,000 with just verbal quotes up to the full government procurement thresholds, which I think is about 213,000 now, where we go through full public procurement, which replaces the old OJU thresholds now that we've left the EU. So I wasn't going to go into them in any great detail. You'll see in the first column what the existing thresholds are and what they're revised to into in the third column. So if anybody's got any queries or questions, I'm happy to take them, but I think they're fairly straightforward.
Thank you very much, Becky. I think it's a decent piece of housekeeping, really, is how I see this. They're 12 years out of date, desperately in need of updating, and I think the report speaks for itself. Are there any comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, there's a housekeeping, needs to be changed, 2011, it's a very long time.
Yeah.
I suppose my question is, in terms of the actual thresholds, did you take, what are the other authorities across the country using? Is this something very similar to what they're using, or is this bespoke to Notts?
Yeah, everybody has their own. I haven't gone into great depth looking, but I know they're similar. When I worked at Derbyshire, there's a very similar range of thresholds that other authorities hold. So I haven't looked in any great detail, but they're in line with general standard practice.
Happy, Councillor Bailey? Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Becky, for introducing the report. The recommendation is on page 9 of the pack, which is that members approve the updated procurement thresholds to be incorporated into the financial procedures of the financial regulations. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody have to second the recommendation? Seconded by Councillor Clark. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? I think that was agreed unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Becky. The next item then is being introduced by Becky as well, which is our Treasury Management Annual Report for 2022-23.
And the strategy that we follow for borrowing and lending. And then you receive a mid-year review and this final year-end review, and in between monitoring reports are brought to Finance and Resources Committee. So the borrowing requirements for the authority are largely driven by the capital programme. In 2022-23, the spend on capital programme was 2.2 million. Some of that was funded from capital receipts, so the borrowing requirement wasn't that significant. We borrowed 6 million back at the end of 21-22 in advance before interest rates rose, which has meant that we didn't need to actually borrow any further funding during 22-23. So the balances that we had at year end from that £6 million worth of borrowing has been invested, and we've had increase of investment income because of that. So if you turn to page 27, the summary of all the Treasury, the prudential limits are in table in section 2.30. You'll see that all the thresholds in there have been adhered to. Borrowing has remained within the boundaries set by Fire Authority, as have the percentages for the borrowing rate, fixed rate and variable rate, and the extent to which the proportion of borrowing over a given time period. So we have a fairly flat profile of borrowing, so we don't end up putting ourselves in danger of increases in interest rates like we've just seen over the last 6 months. So this is mainly a report for information. There's nothing unusual that I need to bring to your attention. So the recommendation for the report is that members note the update on the Treasury management activity during the year as required under the Local Government Act 2003.
Thank you, Becky. Any comments or questions? Councillor Ray?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. It's an excellent report. As much as I agree with it, there's one thing I'm not particularly happy with, I'll be honest with you, and it's unusual to say this, is in 2.3, in terms of, I know it's just a statement about the state of the economy, etc., and it talks about the increase in sickness and so on, and interest rates, which I agree with, but I just thought, I don't personally agree with this, and I'm sure there'll be the people who don't either, that when we talk about what's driving inflation, it talks about, increasing pay inflation. What I'd like to point out is, I'll be honest, I'm speaking as a trade unionist here, inflation was already well out of control, whereas workers have had pay cuts for 10 plus years. Profits have been driving this, and there's been a lot of wealth. It's not pay that's been driving inflation. And I don't think as a body we should start making statements that pay is driving inflation. That's what the government's saying for political reasons, to drive it down. What's been causing inflation is, we've got a cost of greed crisis and we've got record profits. So that is, I wouldn't normally say this, but that's a contentious political point that I don't actually agree with. So I think, I'd like it noted that some people on the authority do not agree with that statement, that it is workers' pay that's driving inflation. So I don't think that's the case.
Okay, thank you. The economic review is provided from our external consultants, but I do hear your note, and I will note that for the future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Any other comments? Recommendation has been read out then by Becky. It's on page 21. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody have to second the recommendation? All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, colleagues. It was unanimously agreed. Item 7 then is the annual governance statement for 2022-23, and this is going to be introduced by Becky as well. It's on page 31 to page 54 of the agenda.
It's my last report. Thank you. So the annual governance statement forms part of the statement of accounts, and we normally bring it alongside the statement of accounts for approval. The issue this year, as you're well aware, the external auditors are running severely behind in schedule because of their resourcing issues, and we're not expecting the 22-23 statement of accounts to be audited until at least 2024, from speaking to our auditors. They have been reviewed by Finance and Resources Committee, and they are available on our website at the moment until they get audited. But due to timeliness, I felt it was more important that this came now rather than waiting for the audited accounts to come before you. So the annual governance statement is split into 3 areas. It outlines the governance framework that the authority has, and it provides a review of the effectiveness and then a conclusion at the end. The areas that we've made significant improvements on in this year are relating to our internal audit annual report, where we got significant assurance on that. So you'll see details on that in section 4.27. And we've also commenced work on our work against the national fire standards on page 49. So the conclusion is on page 3, which says that Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Authority has well developed and evolving governance arrangements in place that are fit for purpose. And we've come to that conclusion on the basis that we have adopted the Code of Corporate Governance back in 2017. We've had that independently verified by the internal auditors. The previous audits that we have on statement of accounts have been issued with unqualified audits, although we still have not had the 21-22 accounts, so that is a little out of date. We do have the auditors in now, and I'm hoping that will be concluded in the autumn. And then we have the internal audit report that I've just mentioned that provided substantial assurance. So with that, the recommendation are that you approve the annual government statement for 22-23, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Becky. Any comments or questions? Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, just like Becky's report, and obviously it's been through the committee already, it's not going to touch much detail. I think it does show there's still obviously a good position compared to some authorities, and I think it just still shows the work we have to do to keep on top of it, which we are doing, because it looks always, as we know, it's an ever-changing thing about inflation and the other external pressures. So it's really important that we keep the thing on the pulse as authorities, elected members, to make sure we don't let the situation change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Any other comments or questions? Recommendations are on page 31 then. Becky's read them out. I'll move the recommendations. So we have to second them. They're seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 8 then is our annual statement of assurance for 2022-23, and this is introduced by Leela, and it's on page 55 to page 100. Leela.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual statement of assurance is really a look back at our activities that have taken place in the service over the last 12 months. And the reason that it's been brought to authority is because we do have a statutory requirement to provide public assurance on finance, governance and operational matters that are associated with the delivery of our corporate risk management plan. The full annual statement of assurance is attached at Appendix 1, and I don't intend to run through it in detail, but I did just want to pick out a few key highlights. And also I would say that the appendix does contain some useful information that you may wish to use in your constituencies to project the good work that goes on in the service. So with regards to the highlights, I think I'd like to pick out the positive external assurance results that we've had, both from His Majesty's Inspectorate, where we received our good grading, and also from Ofsted, with regards to our firefighter apprenticeship provision, which again was rated as good. I think there's a couple of good examples whereby activities are supporting our ongoing inclusion journey. So Leading with Pride, we continue to support both Nottingham and Worksop and Retford Pride this year, and also supporting the deaf community through increasing the accessibility of our emergency 999 provision to them. And also examples of how we continue to invest in our staff and our service through the delivery of new incident command training facilities and also new fire station at Worksop. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leila. Chief?
Yeah, I mean, Leila's just pointed out some things, and Leila's asked the members. There's infographics, there's information there that you can use in your local constituencies. My reflections of this period of the annual statement of assurances, it's been a particularly challenging time for the whole organisation, you know, and communities over the last 12, 15 months. But we need to sometimes remember that there are great things that the whole organisation is doing, both from fire stations, joint headquarters, and support departments. And it's with immense pride when I read documents like this, we see that within those adversities that we face, we're still doing some amazing things. So my ask as your Chief Forest is, please be our advocates, as I know members will be, to project the image of the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments or questions? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, a couple of questions really. First of all, 2.9, the apprenticeship provision. Well done for that on Ofsted, because I know sort of from school governing life and everything, Ofsted is can be traumatic. So well done. Does this sort of happen every year, or depending on previous results, or do we know when they're going to come? Is it random? Just curious, really, because I'm a strong sort of in another life. I'm a strong supporter of the apprenticeships in general. So just interested to hear how that works in Ofsted.
So this was our first Ofsted inspection that we'd had, and the reason that they came to visit us is because we had registered as an employer provider for the firefighter apprenticeship, so we're subject to the same external scrutiny as other education providers, and then their revisits will be put onto a schedule depending on the outcome of the grading that we received. So we anticipate our next visit will be longer than 2 years away.
Not going to rest on your laurels.
No.
And if I may, just one other observation. Just interested in the 999 calling for the deaf community. That's quite new still, isn't it? How's it going? Is it?
Yeah, so we have a number of different systems and functions to try and enhance and improve the accessibility of our 999 service to the community. And we've recently run a series of exercises to test and embed those new systems and processes. Because they're not very frequently used, we obviously need to make sure that they're ready and available when people do want to use them. So, and that's been really successful and obviously involved quite a broad range of the workforce as well.
Oh, good, yeah, so important. So,
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Thank you, Leila. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Rain.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there's, like the Chief said, there's lots to be positive on here. If you look at the infographics, I don't like to use that term, I suppose it's what it is, isn't it? And there's been an increase in incidents, we're up 12% and so on. But in terms of the JAPE work, I know in the city that's been particularly successful. And there's a lot of work. And within that, if you look at our workforce, it's actually declined by 30 or 40. So as I'm saying, we're still, we've got an increased work. So, it is difficult, and that's what it's like in public bodies. The only thing, I know we've talked about this elsewhere, and probably on the strategic inclusion board, is in that part, in terms of recruitment, it talks about underrepresentation, particularly of women and members of the BAME community, and what we're doing for it. So I think that's something we need to keep our eye on, because that's fairly significant from what I've seen. And I think we want to talk about the initiatives that we're doing towards that, or to address that, because that's been a concern, I think, for some time.
Thank you, Councillor Ray.
Yeah,
Leila, did you want to respond to that now? Chief, do you want to?
I don't think Leila wants to come back on anything in particular on the report, but I can add as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of the things you said about reducing workforce, I think what we've seen over the last 4 years, Councillor, particularly around service delivery, and I think even HMR's report talked about the above average decline in our workforce in compared to the English average across fire sector generally. And I certainly know something in terms of the chair and myself, we made representation about that last year. We continue to make representation about that. A lot of that in terms of like the size of the workforce and some of the papers that will be referenced in terms of resourcing to risk. What we actually need is a longer term funding settlement so we can smooth out some of the decisions that the authorities got to make, and that may help that. You point around underrepresentation. In the resourcing to risk paper, there is a nod to that. That was one of the questions that's come from our Fire Brigade Union colleagues, questions around those numbers of posts. Without doing something different, a lot of that is going to remain the same. It's challenging enough in terms of getting people to realise that this can be a job for them. And we commit to doing this work and then don't commit the resources to doing it on a day-to-day basis. We do it almost like boom and bust. We have a recruitment campaign, generally around whole time, not generally around support services, not generally around on-call. Some months up to a recruitment process that we may not do from year to year, we'll do some positive action. We need to do a lot more of that every single day that we're doing it, and that includes our crews doing it as well. So we are doing some of that. We're certainly not complacent about it. We've now got a group looking at the whole-time recruitment process. That should commence with hopefully delivering a whole-time trainee course, or at least 2 trainee courses for next year, starting in April. And I fully expect us to build on the figures we did last time. We saw some impressive percentages of applicants. We need to take the applicants from underrepresented groups through to successful appointments, because we still do have a large dropout rate through the process, whether it be academically or whether it be on physical assessments. But there is a group in the organisation that's now looking at that.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Gul-Khan, then I've got Councillor Bailey, then I'll come to you, Monty.
Thank you, Chair. It's page 87, Grenfell Tower. This tragic event, I know everybody sad for that, what it happened, and probably we never forgot that. But I noticed this last paragraph of this Grenfell Tower inquiry. New equipment has been purchased, including smoke hoods and smoke curtains, which have already been used to rescue people from it. Didn't have appropriate equipment, curtains and the smoke hoods at the time when it happened.
Question about
I'm surprised.
equipment before the.
No, we didn't have smoke hoods in all, like, I wouldn't say they're a new thing, but they're a new thing more broadly, and they were particularly highlighted as an issue around bringing large numbers of casualties out of a building. What we have seen since there is that they have been used in the service, but at even smaller level incidents, so it offers a more respiratory protection for casualties. So they are there now, but they weren't there necessarily before that. And there has been government funding put forward in enabling fire authorities to purchase that initially.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. And I think, as you mentioned, it's not often we get the opportunity to chat about the achievements, and in this case, I just want to highlight very well done to the fire service for this new fire station in Worksop. Very state of the art. I believe quite a few of us attended the opening, and if you look around it, you'll see some excellent facilities there. I'd also like to praise the fire service about the incident in Ranskill. It was very long lasting, and I think it showed a great degree of respect both from the fire service but also the residents. The ice cream van was a very popular destination during that incident. I think it just goes to show that where the fire service does well, we need to make sure that we're continuing to improve. I think that just goes in part to the inspections where we're very good, and I think it's important that we keep up the good work when it comes to that, and we strive for better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whalen. Devonta?
I'd just firstly like to commend you for your work around the equalities agenda. Obviously, just to tie on what Nick's question was, to request, I think I requested previously around an action plan in terms of the recruitment drive and some clear timelines around that to see what's happening. So obviously address the disproportionate amount in terms of ethnic minorities being recruited successfully to the fire authority, and just to really ask if that is information you can share, and if there's a plan that you can either produce or there's one existing that we can monitor with a clear timeline in terms of a delivery plan to ensure that these targets are done in a reasonable time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Devonta. Chief?
Yeah, just to give you reassurance, Councillor, on that. We do have an integrated action plan around EDI. That is under review, yet again, partly driven by the HMI Spotlight report into values and cultures. Fire sector has got a long way to go, both in representation and attitude and behaviour, from the existing workforces across that are involved in fire. Strategic Inclusion Board is also a good place for members to engage as well because of the networks, and the action plan is put through the networks, and there's an inclusion performance group that sits within the organisation as well, but more than happy to share any information that we've got. It's available to you. I don't think we've got any secrets. As somebody said to me, it doesn't say MI5 above the door.
Yeah, and more broadly on this, as the Chief says, it's an area I'm very passionate about, and it's an area that, frankly, the fire sector and we as an individual fire service in here in Nottinghamshire will not resolve unless everybody in the service, all elected members and everybody who works here, sees it as their business and sees it as their priority to make sure that our workforce reflects the community that we represent. That requires people to be an ally. That requires people to stamp out unacceptable behaviour. That requires people who are on stations, who are in offices to challenge behaviour when they see it, when it's not appropriate. Because if people are coming to a workplace and aren't able to be the people that they want to be in their own private life in the workplace, we shouldn't then be surprised if they don't want to apply for a job here in the sector. And I think the sector's got to hold an honest mirror up to itself, and all of us collectively, and I include myself in this, have got to be strong allies in terms of this issue, because otherwise, frankly, it won't change. And the other thing, and I'm not making a party political point here, but it's a self-evident truth, unless and until the fire sector gets long-term financial settlements from the government and we're not living hand to mouth year to year, it's very difficult to plan about recruitment, not just in terms of our frontline service, but also in terms of the functions that actually drive the service, the finance service, the legal service, our HR services. We absolutely need, and there should be cross-party lobbying about this in the lead up to the next general election, we need 4-year, 5-year settlements for our emergency services. We shouldn't be living hand to mouth in terms of our budget year on year, because otherwise you get into the business of salami slicing and cutting services, which is where we've been in the past. I don't think there are any other comments or questions from colleagues. The recommendation is on page 55, which is that members approve the annual statement of assurance 2022-23 publication. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody happy to second it? That's seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's unanimously carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 9, the next item on our agenda then is the item on resourcing to risk, which is a return report to the authority after the request to the Chief to take up this issue at our previous, one of our previous authority meetings. I think the Chief's going to say a few words, and then Damien's going to talk us through the substantive report, and then I'll come to colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union to ask the questions that they've submitted in accordance with our procedures. Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It really is. Damien will take you through the report, but this is kind of a members will be aware that we provided you an efficiencies strategy, Futures 25, and there is a partial update on that as well that will be presented after this report, which is about the strategy that you agreed about how we would deal with the deficit and some of the challenges that we faced. I don't need a reminder in terms of my role about I'm here to serve communities. This report is evidence-based. It will talk about, and Damien will touch on that anyway, it's evidence-based about the risk that communities face in the city and county. It was also on the back of, members will recall, a £2.2 million deficit in February of last year, rising to a £3.3 million deficit by about August or September last year. Thankfully, because we were able to increase the council tax locally and the business rate retention that we got and some of the smaller parts, that was massively reduced. So we didn't have to do some of the more extreme things about removing fire appliances. What it did mean, though, on the back of that, is we were still left with an issue about how we resource to risk within the financial envelope we have. Because again, members will see as part of the reports, at the moment we're still projecting a £1.2 million deficit that Futures 25 has still got to deal with. So this report comes with very few options in terms of how we can do it, but I believe it's the best option we have in terms of resourcing to risk, and Damien will cover some of the issues there, but I would like to thank the team that's been dealing with that, under some pressure from myself, I have to say. And also in terms of like the wider workforce, in terms of the variety of questions on it, the visits I've done at stations, the concerns that staff have had, and our Fire Brigade Union colleagues in particular and other trade unions about the support that we've had along the way, and the scrutiny and challenge that's come along with that as well, and quite rightly so. We're a public body that tries to represent a large number of people. So say no more than that, Chair, other than Damien when I'll take us through the report in more detail.
Thank you very much, Chief. Damien? Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, three really important bits of context really in the background of this report. So this is, as the Chief says, the report to discharge the task from members from the February Fire Authority meeting, where members voted to support the task of the Chief Fire Officer swiftly working up and implementing proposals at Ashfield Fire Station to address the identified gap in resourcing to risk faced by those communities. The service also has, and members will be aware of, the Community Risk Management Plan, which outlines how the service will use its resources to deliver the commitments to communities which are stated, and also the February budget report to Fire Authority, which identified in the medium-term financial strategy the predicted shortfall in revenue budgets for next year in the region of £1.2 million. So in terms of the report, as has been touched on, this is based on the independent fire cover review, which we were commissioned to support our fire cover review within the service. And that independent data by a leading sector expert highlighted where there is indeed an under-provision of fire cover within our communities according to our current resourcing model. The review highlighted and was presented to members in September and then February around the reinstatement of a 24-hour provision of whole-time crewing at Ashfield Fire Station and the benefits that would have in terms of our response, with the reinstatement being predicted to present an average of a 48-second reduction in response time to the communities in that area, and also supporting the service's CRMP commitment around continuing an average of an 8-minute response time to all incidents as an average. In response to the review and the decision by the Fire Authority in February, the service proposes to reinstate whole-time crewing arrangements at Ashfield Fire Station that mirror the arrangements and crewing arrangements that we have at the other 24-hour whole-time stations that we currently have in the service. And this will ensure both resilience across our crewing, but also ensure a simple, efficient and effective transition to that crewing model within the required timeframes. To facilitate the return to whole-time crewing at Ashfield, an additional 12 posts are required across crew, watch and firefighter roles. And to provide those additional roles within the establishment would cost in the region of £600,000 per year, and is not currently deemed viable with the anticipated budget deficit over the medium term. It's therefore necessary to facilitate the required changes at Ashfield within our current establishment, and also cognizant of not affecting the level of fire cover provided elsewhere in the city and county. The proposed approach to returning crewing to 24-hour whole-time cover at Ashfield will be to do that within the current establishment figure of 356 operational posts. And it will see us move to a ridership level of 24 personnel at all single pump compliant stations and 44 personnel at the two pump compliant stations in the city. We would also look at the specialist capabilities at some of our stations and the required crewing levels to ensure resilience and competence at those stations too. This will enable a minimum crew of 4 to be maintained on all whole-time appliances, but also maintain the current provisions under self-rostering and the flexibility of our workforce. The approach may lead to a greater number of occasions where appliances are crewed with 4 personnel. However, it should be noted that in the last year, in 22-23, appliances were crewed with 4 personnel at 65% of occasions. And notably, during the summer period, that rose to around 85% of the time during our busiest period. It is also noted in the report that this approach does present a greater risk in relation to the impact of sickness absence and also other abstractions from the ridership. But the service does have well-practiced and well instructed plans to tackle degradation within the service where required. In addressing this proposal, we've looked at the attendance time for second appliances, so where more than 1 fire engine is required at an incident across all districts, and in rural areas they show a higher attendance time due to the sparsity of appliance availability. However, the longest average availability for second appliance is 6 minutes. It should be noted though that this is reduced to well under 1 minute in the city. To support this approach and this decision, the service will take steps to review our predetermined attendances at incidents, our incident command training, so that our operational incident commanders will be practiced in terms of dealing with resourcing at incidents. We'll also review our current operational procedures and make sure that every step is taken to make sure the safety of our crews at incidents. As we face additional scrutiny nationally in terms of our productivity levels, the proposed changes to the ridership and the presentation of 2 extra watches at Ashfield will increase the productive number of hours and therefore the delivery of services to communities, whilst maintaining that within the current level of establishment. And there will also be a reduction in standby moves, where we see appliances from other stations moved to provide primary fire cover in the Ashfield area. Section 2.12 highlights that the proposed approach to crewing across our whole-time establishment also releases 4 operational posts which will be used to service other priorities within the organisation and within the agreed community risk management plan, making sure that we mitigate corporate risks which are currently presented to the service and some of the areas which the Chair and Chief have already touched on in terms of our development of the workforce, our wider recruitment and our engagement with communities. The implementation of these changes will take a project-based approach. I will be leading a project board to ensure that there is engagement with all stakeholders, including our workforce, representative bodies, and all those affected by these changes. And the timeline of implementation to return a whole-time 24/7 crewing to Ashfield will aim to be by the end of November 2023. However, it is proposed that updates are provided to the authority during that timeline as we progress. We will implement a robust measurement of evaluation and monitoring, both in terms of our delivery of services to communities and also the impact on the workforce, and they will be incorporated into the reporting to the Community Safety Committee in our standard agenda items in terms of service delivery performance. In 2.16 is a proposal that the authority receives further updates as we progress this important work stream at appropriate intervals between now and implementation. There are some other implications, Chair, if I'll just touch on those. In terms of financial implications, because of the provision of crew and watch manager posts, there will be an additional cost of £36,310 per annum for those posts. However, within the delegated responsibilities and authority of the Chief Officer, that will be managed within the current establishment and part of the Futures 25 programme that will be updated on later at the meeting. It's also important to note that we've carried out a quality impact assessment in terms of the proposals, and that will be refreshed as we move through the project phase of implementation. And this highlights benefits to our communities in terms of providing a quicker response time to areas which are highlighted within our Charlie profile for those who are at risk of injury or death from fire. And also it presents opportunities for the workforce to still maintain day shift crewing where required at alternative stations within the service. And finally, Chair, just touch on the legal implications. So as an authority, you do have a statutory duty to provide firefighting, fire safety and responding to other emergencies under the Fire and Rescue Services Act. And equally, there is a requirement to deliver a balanced budget in terms of our approach to crewing. And Finally, this report does present a number of mitigations to our corporate risk register and risks which are captured in section 8 of the report. It presents some risks but by far outweighed in terms of mitigation against others. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chad. There are 2 recommendations for consideration. Thank you very much, Damien. Before I open this to debate and contributions from others, I'm going to go straight to the questions from, there are 3 questions from the Fire Brigade Union, so I'll take each of them in turn. So the first question, which relates to paragraph 2.5 of the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors. 2.5 of the report states that there will be additional costs of around £600,000 to create 12 additional posts at Ashfield. This figure does not consider that current recruitment plans mean up to 50 firefighters will be on apprentice wages by the end of 2024. These individuals are on substantially lower wages than a competent firefighter. In addition to this, due to current establishment vacancy levels, we believe the majority of these costs can be contained within the current budgets in the short term. Does this authority commit to use reserves to cover the slight increase in costs until the true financial implications can be seen?
Thank you very much for the question. So the service does not currently employ any firefighters on an apprenticeship wage and has in fact recently taken steps to ensure that all new firefighters are paid at a higher development rate of pay from their starting date with the service. The service is also undertaking actions to address some of the vacancies in the whole-time establishment within this financial year. It would not, I repeat, it would not be prudent nor appropriate to commit to additional expenditure that would present an even greater deficit than is currently forecast, which Damien's referenced, and which would present a greater risk to the authority in delivering its statutory duty of ensuring a balanced budget. The use of reserves is not sustainable and is not advised by our Head of Finance and Treasurer as an appropriate approach to funding established posts within the service structure. However, members and the Chief Fire Officer, and I have continued to do this while ever I've sat in the chair, and I will continue to do this alongside colleagues from the FBU, will continue to lobby for a much more realistic and longer term funding settlement from central government for this service, as this is the key to a sustainable future that ensures the safety of our communities. And I just finished by saying this: I think this report here today has been a difficult piece of work for everybody involved, but for me it strikes an appropriate balance between the statutory legal requirement of this authority to balance its budget, because if we don't balance the budget, decisions are then taken away from elected councillors here, your representatives in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and decisions will be taken by the Secretary of State. And I can tell you, decisions taken by the Secretary of State won't be cognizant of the local issues and concerns that the FBU and others raise, but it also has to balance the risk that communities in Ashfield face, which was identified in the independent review. And I think this report today, in very, very difficult circumstances where we're still staring down the barrel of a gun at £1.2 million deficit at the end of this year if the government doesn't give us additional money, strikes the balance between our legal requirement to balance the budget so that the fire service doesn't fall sideways, but also addresses the risk that was identified in the independent fire cover review that we did in 2021 that Ashfield communities face. The second question then relates to paragraph 2.1. I'll ask colleagues to ask this, paragraph 2.7. I'll ask colleagues to ask this question.
No, thank you, Chair. The current crew model in Nottingham allows for additional hours to cover sickness, maternity, retirement and other gaps in the ridership. These new proposals will reduce the number of hours available by 28,634. leaving us with a deficit of 11,875 hours. Not only does this remove all our capacity to cover deficiencies in the ridership, but it also removes our ability to maintain standard crew levels, even with the full establishment levels listed within the policy. Will this authority commit to increasing the establishment by 12 to properly crew Ashfield without affecting the level of fire cover provided elsewhere?
Thank you very much for the question. The report today of the Chief Fire Officer is honest and transparent, as I would expect it to be, in stating that the proposed deployment of resources acknowledges that there will be increased occasions where appliances are crewed with 4 personnel. However, and I want to be absolutely crystal clear about this, and I know you will want me to be crystal clear about this as the Fire Brigades Union, the approach being proposed does not mean, I repeat, does not mean that the service is not adopting an approach of permanently crewing with 4 personnel and maintains the flexibility of self-rostering for personnel. The service also has well-established processes managing the levels of ridership and availability of both whole-time and on-call appliances. As outlined in the medium-term financial strategy and referenced in this specific report today, the service faces, which I've already referenced, continued uncertainty in the levels of funding for coming years, and there is an anticipated deficit for the next year in the region of 1.2 million, and anybody observing the economy at the moment, that may go north of 1.2 million, given that the government doesn't seem to be able to get a grip on inflation compared to some of our nearest neighbours in Europe and around the world. The approach proposed by the Chief Fire Officer addresses the requirement of using the current resources that we have in the most effective way to address the identified risk in the Ashfield area, whilst maintaining current levels of fire cover across the city and the rest of the county. The final question from Fire Brigades Union is in relation to paragraph 2.12. Brendan?
Morning, councillors.
Whilst the FBU support the intent behind the proposal to reinstate whole-time night cover at Ashfield with the addition of 12 posts, we do not understand why they are at the same time looking to remove a further 4 posts from the ridership. When day crewing was first implemented at Retford and Ashfield, it was done so with the removal of 44 posts from the ridership. It's completely unacceptable to reinstate this cover, lowering ridership figures at all of the whole-time stations, while simultaneously removing an additional 4 posts. This will lead to serious and dangerous shortfalls in the crewing of other appliances and affect firefighter safety. Will the Fire Authority commit to keeping those 4 posts in the ridership rather than see them reallocated to other departments?
Thank you very much for the question. The disposition and direction of resources is a matter, as you are aware, for the professional judgment of the Chief Fire Officer, providing advice to this Fire Authority. The service has many commitments to its communities in its community risk management plan, and it is the responsibility of the Chief Fire Officer to ensure that the available resources of the service are used effectively to address all of these. I know myself that the Fire Brigades Union are committed to the work relating to the developing the culture in the service and efforts to increasing the establishment figure through positive action and recruitment over coming months. It is vital that these areas of work are resourced effectively, whilst also presenting opportunities for the development of operational colleagues by offering alternative roles within the service. It should also be noted that all operational personnel maintain their operational competencies and remain available to be deployed if required, even when within roles outside of the operational ridership, therefore maintaining a resilience and support for the availability of fire appliances when required. And can I just finish, after the trio of questions from the Fire Brigades Union, just in saying thank you to the way in which the questions have put for putting the questions, but also for the constructive way in which the Fire Brigades Union is engaged on what is clearly a very difficult issue for everybody involved. I sincerely appreciate the strong industrial relations that we have here in Nottinghamshire. They are critically important to providing a good service, and I see the Fire Brigades Union as a key part of that, and I hope that we can continue in a constructive dialogue around these issues. And you have my word, I'll repeat again, that while ever I sit in this chair, I'm more than happy to continue to work with you to make sure that we've got longer term sustainable settlements from central government, but also a stop and an end to this fire service being proportionately singled out for cuts in the way that it has been over the last 13 to 15 years. So thank you to colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union for your questions today and for your constructive engagement. And I look forward to continuing working with you in the future. I'm going to bring in colleagues now who indicated. So I've got Councillor Hollis, Councillor Rain and Councillor Khan were the first people I saw, and then I'll come to Councillor Weir after that. Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Michael. Obviously, I want to firstly start by, on behalf of both Jason and I, really saying thank you to everybody involved, including yourself, Chief and Damien particularly, for all the work we've done and the unions in actually coming to the point where we are. And obviously Jason's he can't be here in person today, but he has just asked me to read something out on behalf of himself as the leader of the council, but also as a member. I would like to thank the thousands of residents who joined the Ashfield Independent campaign for a full-time fire station. We have always said the decision to move to a part-time station in 2018 was the wrong one. The Ashfield Independents instigated the fire service review, led Ashfield's response to the consultation and never gave up. It's another example of working with community to deliver positive results that make lives safer. This is why we do the job we do, and I'm delighted as the council leader with the decision that's going to be taken today. And I think on behalf of myself, Michael, I think, obviously I was there in 2018, I think with other colleagues, and we know some of the awful things that have happened, number of deaths, etc. in the Ashfield area. And I think it has led to a level of fear and other issues across the communities. But I think the way the fire service responded in a sensitive way, because of course, as much as I have to acknowledge this, Ashfield is only a small part of the county and the city, and I think the way we've been able to reflect on the decisions that have been taken, actually look at new stats, because of course things evolve, there's new communities built, etc., things change. I think it's been phenomenal, and I think it's only happened because of the people in this room, and I think almost entirely cross-party as well. I think it's been really good. I mean, I will say one negative thing, and I'll start with a positive. Of course, all communities across the county and city are very engaged. We've had a number of meetings, of course, with the colleagues of the combined authority, but I think as a councillor, I'm extremely disappointed that the Ashfield MP at no point got involved with this consultation, even despite asking him. We wrote to him a second time to say, do you want to make a comment? There's still nothing, and I think that was disappointing, and I think we could have probably got to this stage a lot sooner with a little bit of wind behind from the MP. That's not to take away from the cross-party support that we've had in this room, and I think the good work that's going to come from this review, and ultimately on behalf of Jason and I, the independent people of Ashfield, I think this is a really positive move, and I only want to say thank you, because it took a lot. I know it's took a lot of work to get to where we are. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Ray.
Thank you very much. And I think it is positive in terms of Ashfield. I mean, I think we'd all agree with that. It's glad that they've got that back, and in terms of the rural area surrounding that, that's obviously something positive. What concerns me about this is there's the good part to it, and this is what we tried to do, and obviously then we've got what looks like quite a significant reform. I think what I'd say first of all is, obviously we're in a situation, I won't repeat what people have said, where funding is a massive issue, it's a horrific issue, and in public bodies I'm sick of attending meetings where it's cut, and we've reformed things up to a point, and now we're looking at cuts, and this is what it is. But what worries me about this, and I'll have to raise it, is it even says in the document, and I'm risk adverse admittedly, but under the risk management implications, I mean, for example, when it talks about availability of resources, it talks about a risk being mitigated in part, and I know as a service we can't fully get rid of risk, but then when you look at the reform in terms of, I mean, we talked about the figures earlier on for the workforce, and they've declined even though work has increased, and some of that's due to efficiency, but there's bound to be an effect on our workforce in terms of the amount of work they're doing, if you like, with fewer and fewer resources, and I think we all recognise that. That's important. But in terms of ridership levels, they're in 2.8 when we're talking about going from 6 to 4 regularly, and we're talking about sickness, and our colleagues in the FBU are talking about how that's going to be cutting down in terms of hours. I've got real concerns, as I'm sure other people have. This looks like a significant reform, and obviously I'm not operational like the chief fire officer is, but to see it's just been mitigated and there are problems around it, I'm thinking, I'm uneasy about it, Damien, I suppose, from that respect, because we've got more and more complex buildings in the city. I know there's issues in the rural area, and we're going to have fewer firefighters riding here. That's for me an issue. That's a grave concern. So whilst it's good news about Ashfield, I'm very uneasy about the things that are outlined in 2.8 in terms of ridership and how that's going to affect. And I do have to think, how's that's going to affect us otherwise? Are we going to have to put it on overtime? Are there other implications and other costs here that we've got? But the main one for me is about safety and workload, and that's a real concern. So
thank you for your concerns, Councillor. I mean, that's what, as Chief Officer, I want the challenge and I want the scrutiny from members to make holders to account. I suppose I'll go back a bit longer in terms of what have the last 10 years been like as one of your principal officers, and looking at the size of the workforce we had and how we could spread and how thin or how thick that was spread and where it was spread and what the challenges are. And the challenges have changed over that time. We're not making a policy decision outright to say this is the future of riding for. You know, what does that mean? We effectively will be riding for more occasions. We've not sought to hide it in the report at all because it wouldn't be the right thing to do. I also have to think about risk in terms of where we are. I have to think about the risk to the communities as you'd expect me to. There is less risk to communities, which has got to be the right thing to do. And the risk in the organisation and the professional people that deal with that risk are going to carry some more of that risk in a different way. I would also say around the fire sector in the last decade, many other services have a policy decision of riding for and have done for some years. I have advocated not doing that. Unfortunately, to be able to do some of the things we want to do, that is the option we have in front of us in terms of dealing with communities. And I know the Chair's made the point about the finances. When how much or how little I get is what I get, and I have to deal with the risk that's in front of us. So I think in terms of what Damien's pointed out there in terms of firefighter safety, I wake up and go to sleep every day knowing that I put people in harm's way, and I know that that risk that they will face is going to change. Whether it's greater or less will be an argument in terms of the ways of working that we'll have to look at in the incident command training. I have faith in the commanders we have, I have faith in the people we have in this organisation, but the risk profile is clearly going to change. And some of those demands that we face now, which is, well, those 4 people that are coming off the ridership, we've got 30 appliances that we focus on resourcing so that they can respond under blue lights, but we've got a lot of other pressures that we don't resource at all, and we're going to be scrutinised. I mean, we've talked about in terms of like EDI is one area, culture, all those kind of things, training of additional staff that are going to come in positive action. You've talked about the change in profile in buildings in the city. Buildings and building management, even though legislation has changed, I don't see at this stage improving dramatically just because we've got new legislation in. What I do see is when our fire protection teams go out and our crews now doing business safety checks, making the amount of referrals they send to our fire protection department because of the poor standards of building management in the city and county. So yes, it's a challenge. I can only give my assurances that we've got a lot of focus and attention on it. There's going to be lots of engagement with the trade unions, as there always is, and there'll have to be a lot of engagement with staff. It's very easy on this one thing about resourcing to risk to just think about Ashfield. You've quite rightly pointed out here, Ashfield is getting a really positive outcome. This will affect every one of my stations in the city and county. And I would also point out in terms of crewing levels, we took a decision that's a contentious one some years ago that we would alternatively crew on-call appliances, where on some occasions they ride 3 with a reduced call out of what they can go to, but at least communities get some support on some types of incidents from some locations. And of course, out of your on-call appliances during summer, 4 or 6 of those appliances aren't available at all. So if I point to Southwell, which is a predominantly one, I think they're doing quite well actually over the last year or so. I think they're running at about 65% available. You know, there has been years when that appliance is only 40% available because there aren't people to crew on-call appliances. You know, my plea as a fire service leader is that some of the models nationally aren't working for today's society, and I can't solve those for you in isolation here. So nationally, there's got to be some really, longer-term thinking about models that apply and how they are funded. Long-winded answer, but it's given me the opportunity. I think you opened the door, so I'll walk through it, Councillor.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Khan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Actually, my question I think has been answered at 2.4 and additional 12 posts are required. I think
Thank you.
it's been answered.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think, as a group, I welcome any measure that reduces our average response time, which is what we are seeing under 2.2. And yes, that will be predominantly around the Ashfield and Northern area of the county, but as we all know, as the Chief has already said, it's a fluid more around the whole county, where the appliance is going across the county and across borders at times. I think I completely understand the points made today in terms of potential risks, in terms of deploying resources more thinly. I do take the advice of the officers, in terms of the professionals, as you alluded to as well, Chair, in terms of the recommendation made in front of us. I think what's important is, as we sort of touch on in one of the recommendations 10.2, is about the reviewing this and having further updates. If we are looking around November time, I think a report 6 months into Port Authority to see how that's going in terms of response rates, because one concern that we might have in certain areas of the county may be that we will see, if there are more curing of corn free, that some clients can't go out, and we need to have a look at that. Not that's going to happen, but let's review that to make sure we're not going to a problem down the line, and to address that and see what we have to do, any measures to mitigate those risks. Because like yourself, I was on the authority all those years ago when we made the decision the first time around Ashfield at the time, which we were told was again on the advice we had at the time and the information front of it. So I think what it highlights is the need to regularly be reviewing it and just see if there's measures we can take at the quickest available opportunity to avoid getting a situation that perhaps we've found ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, the review, Councillor, not a problem with that at all. Around the availability of whole time, if members of the Community Safety Committee are probably aware that I think 2 or 3 meetings ago, I asked, I don't know if it was CFO Charman, to introduce the reporting of whole time availability. We'd normally reported on-call availability because that had always been the issue, because we knew a report was coming in, because we probably knew that the options that might be available. And I knew that the risk of actually spreading the workforce thin might mean the clients to go off the wrong. We started reporting the whole time availability prior to this decision, so that actually we've reported to you in the last 2 or 3 CS committee reports. So part of the monitoring evaluation, we'll be able to see over the next 6 to 12 months what some of these changes have made to the wider workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Wheeler, any other comments or questions? The recommendations then are that members support and endorse the approach of the Chief Fire Officer in the deployment of resources to risk, and agree to receive further updates at full authority meetings relating to this work stream. These are recommendations. Somebody have to second them? Seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? They're carried, not unanimously, but they are carried. Item 10 then is Futures 25 Phase 2 update, and I think this is going to be introduced by Leila.
Thank you, Chair. So we've been talking about Futures 25 for around about the last 12 months or so, and members will recall really Phase 1 of the programme was very much concerned with efficiencies, and as the Chief Fire Officer has spoken about earlier, thankfully a number of the plans that we developed to deal with the projected budget deficit didn't have to be enacted. So the original intention of Futures 25 was that it was never just about efficiencies. It was also seen as being the vehicle through which we would deliver service improvement and service redesign. And for that reason, at the start of the work, we did set aside a significant amount of budget to deliver the service improvement element of the work. Before I go on to cover in a little bit more detail about what Phase 2 of the programme looks like, I think what we can't do is separate out some of the things that are happening nationally. So as the work has developed, it's become really clear that the operating context of the fire service generally is changing, and it's changing really quickly. We've got lots of risks that we're having to manage and mitigate much more dynamically and more quickly than we're used to having to. And I think rightly so, there is a building expectation on the sector about the more concerted efforts that we need to make to improve EDI, values, culture and leadership within the service. So for this reason, it's become obvious that these national priorities need to be drawn in to the Futures 25 programme, and that's to make sure that they can be resourced appropriately but also delivered quickly, which I think it's incumbent on all of us to do. What we also can't separate is the expectations that are coming nationally, both from the Inspectorate and also from the Home Office. So members will recall that we were specifically requested to provide efficiency and productivity plans. For the first time, they were accounted for separately, and we had to submit detailed financial information and also qualitative information about what we were doing to improve efficiency. And the requirement for that was coupled with the permission that we got to increase council tax by £5. So the LGA have proposed across the sector that 2% of non-pay efficiencies and 3% productivity increases could be delivered over the period. So Futures 25 also aims to respond to those demands. So section 216 provides a high-level overview of the 4 key work streams that will be delivered as part of phase 2 of the programme, and I'll just cover those off in turn. So first of all, the programme aims to review the efficiency and effectiveness of the governance and the meeting structures that operate within the service. Now that sounds quite dry, but really what we're primarily concerned with is about making sure that we have wrapped an appropriate amount of control and risk mitigation around the decisions that are being taken. So making sure that those decisions that present the highest risk are obviously assured at the highest level, but also that where possible we're able to devolve responsibility out to the most appropriate level in the organisation. And the reason that we would like to do it and need to do it is to make sure that we can react dynamically and respond quickly to both the ask nationally, but also to make sure that the community outcomes are as good as they can possibly be for the communities of Nottinghamshire. The second element is around revenue budget management. And this is linked to the ask from the Home Office to provide 2% non-pay efficiencies over the spending review period, which runs to 24-25. Now, it should be noted during budget setting for this financial year 23-24 that the service had already found £1.1 million worth of savings that have either been reinvested into CRMP projects or have contributed towards reducing the deficit. And that is well in excess of the 2% target that's been set by the Home Office. Although, as the report states in section 221, it is noted that some of these savings were temporary in nature and were pay related due to vacancies within the substantive workforce. The service has also been asked to quantify in more certain terms non-cashable savings as part of the Home Office submission, and we're currently working with Becky and her finance team to enhance the routine monitoring and reporting of non-cashable savings. I think it's important to note as well with regards to looking at revenue budgets and specifically non-pay budgets that we do understand and feel it's incumbent on us to make sure that we've done all that we possibly can to extract any remaining savings that there might be in non-pay budgets before we start to consider pay budgets to deal with the projected deficit that we anticipate to see by the next financial year. The third element of work has been badged up as service redesign, and that's really the most significant bulk of the work and is where the majority of the investment will fall. What the service redesign elements aim to do is to identify where we've got an interface of working systems, working processes and people improvements that can be made to streamline and make internal ways of working more efficient, and really where we can extract improvements in our service delivery so that they tend to be quite, although it might not appear investing in an ICT system has a direct impact on communities, it does, because it then frees those people up who are doing administration or other things to be able to do other activities. In identifying the systems and processes that we want to look at, it's been reassuring that we've done a significant amount of consultation with the workforce as part of developing the programme, and it has been reassuring that the systems that our workforce themselves have identified for improvement have already been identified by the programme team. Some of the improvements will be dealt with as part of our annual delivery plan for this year, and what Futures 25 enables us to do is to access additional funding to either expedite that work or to go beyond the scope that was originally anticipated. And really that is the ethos of how we would like to deliver Futures 25. So I've been really clear that any redesign activities that take place will be done in conjunction with the workforce, and we want to generate a very kind of ground up approach to identifying service improvement but also implementing it, because I really strongly believe that actually the people who hold the answer to service improvement are the people who are doing the job every day. So to that end, we have engaged a dedicated communications and organisational development professional who will support us with that workforce engagement and support us with delivering that work. Finally, as I alluded to earlier, the importance of culture, EDI and leadership, and for this reason this has been added as a fourth element to the programme. I think it's recognised that people are the key part to any delivery of any change programme, and are key to making it a success. But also, rightly, public attention and expectation has been focused on culture, behaviours and leadership within the fire and rescue service, and it is incumbent on us to respond to this quickly and professionally. For this reason, we have integrated these elements of work into Futures 25 to provide the necessary resourcing, but also to make sure that the work will progress with the speed and pace that would be expected, both by members, by our own workforce and by communities. So that was all I'd like to say, Chair. Thank you. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Leah, and let me just put on record as well on behalf of the authority a huge thank you to you for what is clearly a very difficult piece of work and complex and complicated piece of work, but absolutely crucial not only for us closing the budget deficit that we've already made reference to, but also making sure that the organisation is fit for the future in terms of the challenges that our communities face, which is who we're here for at the end of the day. I know you've worked really hard on this, and thank you for the comprehensive report and the way you've presented it. Are there any comments or questions for Leila? Councillor Rain?
Yeah, thank you, Leila. Again, we're coming at this from a lay person's point of view, so I'm looking at it and thinking, obviously I understand why we make efficiencies, and we do, as a body we do that, and we've been asked by the Home Office to make more. We have had a number of items today that we've talked about an increase in incidents or issues for the workforce, and and I just wanted to flag this up. In terms of the cost of this, we're spending 900,000 as an earmarked reserve on the implementation of it, and I can see there's going to be a cost to it. And it talks about engaging a professional. I mean, is that, first of all, is that an outside consultant? And I'm worried about cost, because we've just made a decision about ridership based on something that would have cost 600,000, and now we're dedicating 900,000 to this. I'm not saying that there could well be a reason for that, but I'm just highlighting the unease in terms of we're spending money on the decisions we're making. There's vital, obviously, in terms of we change our culture, we employ a more representative of the community, etc. That I can see. But some of the other reorganisation, I'm thinking when we're cutting back on frontline services to a certain extent, and we've had that discussion, I'm going to back to it, but we're spending more money on this, how does that fit in? How do we explain that to the public? And
Okay, thank you for your question. So I think, and the Chief Fire Officer's already alluded to it, the responsibility of the service is to make sure that we're responding in a balanced way to different risk, and that isn't to downplay the risk that is posed from the emergency response element of the organisation. I think when we've seen over the years that I've worked in the service, which is about 10, a significant reduction in the numbers of support staff who are key to delivery of services to communities, and if we don't continue to evolve our ICT systems, our processes and ways of working, then we will see a degradation in service. And I think a lot of the good work that we've managed to deliver to date with regards to EDI, culture, values and behaviours in the organisation, it's been done with a very small number of staff, 2 or 3 individuals who've worked really hard to achieve everything that they've achieved. But I think to see the step change in improvement that we need to deliver in those areas, it does require some investment, and that investment is mitigating a different sort of risk to the operational risk, but a risk to the service and a risk to the authority nevertheless. Just to pick up on your point about the organisational development and engagement role, that is an internal member of staff. It's not delivered via a consultancy. And again, I think, you know, I've been really clear that workforce engagement is really key to the success of the programme, and actually making sure that we can talk to station-based staff about what we can do to make their lives easier, what we can do to make the systems and the processes that they use more efficient, so their time is more available to be doing the community-facing activities that they would prefer to be doing, rather than servicing the systems in the office. So I know it might seem counterintuitive, but the investment is, I would still see it as a risk mitigation investment, just of a different type.
And just to be strongly in support of what Leela's saying, and I think she's answered brilliantly, there are two distinctions here. There's a 600 grand revenue cost year on year. This is about a one-off investment from reserves, and we should never ever see the fire service as solely reliant on our frontline colleagues. Our frontline colleagues wouldn't be able to mobilise without support colleagues that we've got. We have an ethos that we're one team, and we are one team, and the service wouldn't operate without all the individual cogs working in tandem. And we've talked earlier very passionately as elected members about the need to improve the culture in the fire service. You said yourself, Councillor Rain, we need more women, we need more BME firefighters. We won't get that if we don't invest in our organisational workforce and development areas, which is precisely what part of this work, Futures 25, that Leela is doing is about. So I think the question and the challenge is absolutely right and appropriate, but I think the robust answer back is absolutely appropriate as well. We should never just see the frontline workforce as the only part of the fire service that is important. The whole gambit is important, and it goes back to the point we were making earlier. We unfortunately day by day are facing not only a whole range of risks, but also invidious choices, because our budget is going like that for reasons that are well rehearsed in here that I don't need to go over again. Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, no, just to thank Andrew for the report, because I say we've that many meetings we've gone through this, and I know the hard work goes into it. Someone's going to create looking at efficiencies and how you do around business. It's never an easy thing, especially when you talk about people at the end of the day, not just services and money. But it's really important, as we've been alluded to, and what you touched on, Chair, as well, that it's yes, we've all heard the budget and the finances of the authority. That's one part of the work stream. There's 4 token. No matter any money you have in an organisation, it's public money, so we should always be focused on: are we moving as efficient as possible? Are we putting as much money into services as you alluded to? So do welcome the report, and say we'll have to obviously keep engaging to see how we can keep moving it forwards. As you rightly say, we should be looking at investing. Are we investing the right way, which is what we've already talked about, and there will be a scrutiny process to go through that to make sure that money is being well spent into what we've agreed should go into. Thank you.
Councillor Wheeler? Any other comments? Councillor Lynn?
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lucky enough over the past few months to speak to lots of people that work for us. And the biggest criticism that I'm getting, and I don't know what is the right answer to this, to be honest, is now isn't the time to look at growth, now isn't the time to look at doing everything. It's the time to look at our key services. And I think with the situation that we are dealing with the budgets and finances, that we do need to look at what we do well and what we're expected to do, and maybe it's time to start having a look at what other things that we do that we maybe don't need to do, and we start just pulling back slightly. I don't think now is the time to grow, and it's time to hold the line. It's not what we want to hear, it's not what we want to do. We want to be great and be great at everything. But the one thing I'm getting back from the people that work for us is we're expecting too much from them. And I'm more than happy to speak to the unions if they don't think that's the case. However, that's what I'm hearing on the ground.
Thanks, Councillor, and I think that before I bring in the Chief, there are two separate things there, aren't there? There are stresses and strains on the capabilities of the people who work for us, and they're really important. And if there are concerns about those, we absolutely need to hear about them. I fundamentally disagree with your second point. I can believe you me, in the chair that I sit in, we're not growing. We're declining as a result of a lack of investment from central government. We're nowhere near growing, and I would also very, very strongly argue with you that we should retreat from the areas we're working in. We're down to the bare bones of the crucial services that people in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire rely on, and I'd be really interested to hear from you what particular examples of work you think that we should be retreating from, because I think I'd struggle to name any particular areas where we should be retreating from. At the minute, our service is an absolutely critical service that's under huge financial stress and strain. Our staff day by day bear that strain, and where they've got that strain, we should rise to the occasion, but it certainly doesn't feel to me, sat in the chair of this authority, like we're growing in any sense at
I
all.
don't want to pass on what I'm being advised.
No, absolutely. No, I hear that, but I'm just telling you, it's not how it feels from my perspective. I don't think it's not how it feels for quite a lot of people who work in the service as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose, Councillor, on the piece like that is that you have a community risk management plan. It is your CRMP about what this authority is committing to do and the services it's delivering for community. So there's an opportunity there. We'll be developing that over the next 15, 18 months, ready to introduce the new one in April 2025. So there's an opportunity to look at it. What I can assure members, we look at that every single month. The Community Risk Management Plan Assurance Board that I chair, that looks about how we are performing against the current Community Risk Management Plan and where we are. I think there's been a step change and there's a pushback almost around productivity. How many things can you do in an hour? And there's a little bit for me is about what contribution are we making with the ambitions we have. Because what I won't do as your Chief Officer, and what you would expect me not to do, is not to be ambitious for this organisation. And I'd probably pull us back a little bit as well, is that given the staff we've got, given the challenges we've got, we are doing really, really well across a lot of things. I would ask members to go back to the annual statement of assurance to look at what we are doing with what we have got. Because I think it must be a British psyche just to kind of like be almost somewhat pessimistic. I think when you step back and look a little bit more reflective about what we are actually achieving as a fire authority, given the circumstances, we're doing really, really well. Culturally in the organisation over the last 4 to 5 years around productivity and what we're doing and where we're doing it, I have seen a massive improvement. What comes with that is tensions in your workforce about we didn't used to do it like this, we're being asked to do more for less and all. And I hear the same thing on my visits around council. But what I am beginning to hear as well, so things like business safety checks, and I've heard a number of crews say to me over the last few months, we're now beginning to see different risk in the community that we didn't see before. We're now more engaged with fire protection. So actually the benefits that they're having by doing different things and more of them, but I have to accept when I do say this to staff, there's only so much you can do with the amount of people you've got. The efficiency side is what are we doing and when are we doing it and when with who? And I think that's the real challenge for us now is what's getting done and when and how are we prioritising work, and a little bit around the governance, giving people a lot more autonomy to start making decisions at the point where they should be doing the task, not waiting for it to be top down the Chief Fire Officer wants. We expect in terms of performance management, the workforce to be making more autonomous decisions about doing good things for communities. And sometimes that's difficult.
Thank you, Chief. The other thing I just think is really interesting around the point you raised, Councillor Lee, I wish government ministers shared your mantra, because I sit on the NJC that deals with firefighters' pay, and I have to tell you every time I go into those conversations there's a new request from government ministers about additional tasks or responsibilities that firefighters and people in the fire service should be carrying out. There's never any new money that comes with it. And it just feels like time after time after time there's a focus and a pressure on productivity, on new responsibilities for the fire sector and fire service without the appropriate investment. And I don't think in every conversation we're being in with civil servants and government ministers that's going to change anytime soon. I think there's going to be an even heavier focus on productivity. I don't think I'm seeing any other indications in terms of the report. The recommendations, thank you, Leila, for the report. Recommendations are on page 109, which is that members note the content of the report and agree to receive future updates on the Futures 25 programme. I'll move the recommendations. Do we have to second them? They're seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. Item 11 then is His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services update report, which I think Damien's going to talk us through.
Thank you, Chair. So this report covers two key areas for members. Firstly is the publication of His Majesty's Inspectorate's State of Fire and Rescue report, which is an annual report and indeed the first report of the new Chief Inspector of Fire and Rescue, Andrew Cook. And secondly, we look at the commencement of the third round of inspections by His Majesty's Inspectorate and the plans that are being put underway within the service to prepare us for our third inspection by later this year. So firstly, members, the State of Fire report was published in January. It is now a well-established publication within the sector, and it's the opportunity for His Majesty's Inspectorate to review the inspections of the previous year, to look at the overview of those inspections and make recommendations to the sector, both to government, to fire and rescue services themselves. And it is covering the three inspection areas of people, efficiency and effectiveness. So looking at those three areas, we'll give a summary of the findings. Firstly, in efficiency, section 2.4 onwards. The efficiency assessments are around resource management and then the affordability and management of resources. And His Majesty's Inspectorate highlighted that there had been overall a decrease in efficiency across services that have been inspected, with some services showing lower grades than in their first inspections. And indeed, a number of range of issues were highlighted by the Inspectorate, including inadequate pre-planning for collaboration, a lack of fully developed saving plans, staff shortages, which have been referenced today, issues in terms of resource management and challenges associated with funding and governance within fire and rescue services. And indeed, the Inspectorate highlighted that most fire and rescue services have scope to improve their productivity through using more effective performance management, through increasing the use of whole-time firefighters in prevention and protection activity, and indeed the better use of technology, which Leila has referenced as a key area of our Futures 25 programme. National productivity targets have been developed and there's an aim to allocate additional work to whole-time firefighter capacity across the sector, and most services were highlighted as needing to ensure that their activity linked locally to their risk and indeed the plans within their community risk management plan. The Inspectorate moves on to look at effectiveness within the service, and in 2.8 you see the 5 areas which they judge in terms of making an assessment for effectiveness for a service. It was found during the last round of inspections that many fire and rescue services lacked a clear link between their risk management plan and then the daily activity within the service. However, it was highlighted that most services respond well to incidents, although availability and use of resources could be improved in some cases. Sadly, nationally, we have seen an increase in fire fatalities over recent years, and this indicated, according to the Inspectorate, a need for the understanding of local risks and the deployment of resources, particularly in relation to the activity of fire prevention. Although it was noted as well that since the tragedy at Grenfell and the focus that has been made upon fire protection, that has improved within the sector, although the recruitment of fire inspectors, fire safety inspectors continues to be an issue, and indeed is one that we see here in Nottinghamshire. The final element, people, and the focus in terms of how the service develop, look after and lead their staff. And again, the common themes in that were challenges around recruitment across both Green Book and Grey Book staff, and particularly in specialist roles, whilst that need and requirement of services retains around diversifying their staff via effective recruitment and positive action. Services were highlighted as having risk-critical training as a particular strength, which we would expect, and some services recognised for their efforts in terms of developing training, particularly in relation to leadership and management, and training of their staff in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion issues. With that, however, it was identified as a sector-wide and immediate need for better EDI practices. And after the publication of the State of Fire report in January, we indeed saw the commissioning of the Spotlight Review on Culture by His Majesty's Inspectorate, which members have been updated on in terms of the findings of that report and what we indeed, the actions we're taking locally. In terms of the State of Fire report, I think it's important that it really puts into context the findings of the Inspectorate when they visited us here in Nottinghamshire and the good grading that we got across the board in terms of our results and our inspection. We have seen increases in productivity. We've seen effective results in terms of the training and retention and recruitment of our personnel. And whilst we're not resting on our laurels in terms of that, I think it sets a good context in terms of the achievements of the service in the past 12 months. So looking forward, and in section 2.16 and onwards in your report, the third round of inspections is now underway and have indeed been started in neighbouring services such as Lincolnshire, who have seen inspectors in their service over the last couple of months. It is anticipated that we will see our third full inspection in the autumn of this year, between September and the end of the year. There have been changes which were consulted upon and members were updated previously regarding, and most notably in terms of that, is the addition of a further grading criteria of adequate, which will be placed between good and requires improvement in terms of the scale of judgment. Also, the three pillar judgments of people, efficiency and effectiveness will no longer be scored in their entirety, and rather the 11 construct areas of those will each get an individual grading. This is hoped that it will enable a greater understanding of specific areas of performance for each service. And indeed, the process of publishing a tranche, so each inspection round is split into 3 tranches, and the inspectorate will wait for a full tranche to be concluded before publishing the reports. That has now been disbanded in favour of publishing reports as soon as they're available for individual services. In terms of preparation for the forthcoming inspection, the service has continued to learn from our process around facilitation and support of previous inspections. And we are ensuring effective communication with both the workforce, with members, and also focusing on ensuring that the service understands the process which we'll be facing later in the autumn. In addition to that, we continue close scrutiny of the areas for improvement. The Inspectorate gave us 4 areas for improvement, which the authority discharged to the committees, and they continue to be closely monitored to make sure that they're progressing in line with our plans as a service. We also continue, as the Chief mentioned earlier, through the Community Risk Management Plan Assurance Board to ensure progress against our Year 2 business actions and to support the risk mitigation that's required for those risks facing communities. Finally, in 2.23, HMIC FRS, His Majesty's Inspectorate, has highlighted the close links with the national fire standards created by the Independent Fire Standards Board and how the scrutiny of those will be undertaken during the inspections. And we continue to work both departmentally and organisationally to ensure that these standards are received, that a thorough analysis is carried out against them, and then the work to fulfil those standards is incorporated into our annual planning. Chair, that's a summary, a very brief summary, but happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you, Damien. Any comments or questions? Councillor Ray?
Thank you. Thanks, Damien. Thanks for the report. The number of things to highlight members may or may not be aware of. I mean, obviously, in 2.11, talk about fire safety inspectors, and obviously we've had an issue some time, haven't we, in terms of training them up and then retaining staff, because it takes a couple of years at least, doesn't it? And then, you know, there's issues around that, I think around pay, etc., some stuff that we can't sort out, but that is an ongoing problem, isn't it? And I think we're looking at the Human Resources Committee. It's good that we're prepared for the inspection. I noticed the grading, and I suppose what I'm thinking straight away is does that mean more authorities are going to be graded adequate because they've put that between requires improvement and good, you know? So that's you'll know better than that about me. One thing does worry me about this, though, is from 2.5, where some of the statements quite rightly talk about, you know, they've done inspections, and, you know, there's been issues connected to, you know, we'd expect this, we've been talking about it today, staff shortages, issues with resource management, challenges with funding, etc., and government arrangements. And then the solution of the inspection is, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic here, it says so themselves, that it's going to become more effective through the use of performance management arrangements. You know, I seriously don't think it's not, I know it's not your report, etc., but I mean, that just seems to be kicking the teeth, doesn't it? So you haven't got enough staff, you haven't got enough money, but we put performance management regime in, it'll make everything all right. And I think, you know, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps I've misinterpreted that, but that's something you would challenge and think, well, actually, I don't think that's an appropriate response to an inspectorate, if that's what it's come from.
Yeah, I suppose we're on the point. I'm not saying it's a misinterpretation, but it's a common interpretation of performance management, I think, Councillor, really, is that in the workplace, performance management sometimes is seen as you manage poor performance. What they're saying is around your business plan, your prioritisation, assessment of risk, and then how are you performance managing against those things you've identified that's important. And sometimes, and we're still maturing in that sense as well. You know, even a conversation we had over the day around how we measure performance and what does it actually mean. So what they're saying is we're not very mature across the sector around performance management generally. Not if you just performance manage things, it'll be fine.
Right. Okay.
I think just as well, in the Safety Fire report, there are recommendations at all levels, and whilst obviously we focus on the recommendations to the service and how we can continue to improve our journey, there are recommendations to government in there as well, and particularly around reform, which the white paper began to look at, and whilst that may have stalled nationally, there are focuses around funding models and around clarifying the role of fire and rescue services in communities as well.
Any comments or questions from you? Right. Councillor Butler.
Just out of interest, really, a procedural thing. I know we're looking towards September time, give or take, for it to come. It's a bit like the Ofsted question, actually. Do they tell us when they're going to come, or do they just literally turn up out of the blue? And
Yes, it's a well-planned process at the moment. So the Inspectorate decided to undertake a full inspection round this time as well. So they were inspecting across all spectrum as opposed to like a thematic review. It is anticipated that following this third round of full inspections, the Inspectorate may then move to more thematic reviews, which we saw around the Culture Spotlight report.
Right.
But at the moment, yes, it's well planned. We have a really good relationship with our service liaison lead. We have a dedicated contact in HMIC, and we have dedicated personnel within the service to maintain that contact. So it's a very constructive two-way relationship with them.
oh, that's good then. So we don't sort of naturally fear an inspection, because normally when you talk about inspections, you're always it's tempted to be on the defensive, isn't it? You think, oh, what are they going to find? But it's good to hear you've got a sort of two-way dialogue going.
It's a really productive relationship.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scrutiny. It is an onerous process for the organisation to prepare and then to facilitate it. But it is. We've always approached it under the direction of the chief, really, that we have an open process. We encourage engagement with our workforce.
Yeah.
We really support that. So. There's a lot of work goes into it, and some great work by some of the staff, but it is a very open relationship with the Inspectorate and making sure we communicate effectively with them.
Okay. Well, watch of interest.
Thank you, Richard. Fontaine?
Just to follow up on what Nick said and kind of support his sentiments and statements around the performance management issue, which I think is really key in terms of conversations, I think, in some of the other fire authority committee meetings that I've attended to see you guys are on a downward trajectory in terms of finances that are allowing you to run services at 100% capacity. And I think performance management for an employee in particular can be really tough, especially when the service demand is a lot higher and significantly higher. That's what's required in terms of pay and not knowing whether your job is safe. So I think what I would request or ask is within that report that there's a bit more clarity on it, and if an amend can be made around what that actually involves, because it's a very generic phrase that's been used there, and you obviously as a fire chief have explained that to a certain level, but I think when it's down on paper it's very open for misinterpretation, so it'd be good if we could get a bit more clarity on that's specific to what that involves. Thank you.
Can I just be clear about which report are you referring to?
This report that Nick's mentioned and the point that was raised around performance management.
State of Fire report.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a national report by HMI.
Yeah, I think for the impact of how it's going to affect Nottingham Fire Service, because it's the interpretation from a national report, the boots on the ground and how they interpret that report, how they actually exercise that. So I think that's going to be really important.
We have had a report on that, Devontae, but we can get that shared. But as and when, I don't know whether there is going to be another state. Is there going to be another state of fire?
Yeah, we believe it'll be an annual report. And I will just say that a lot of that is obviously focused at the sector. And if we focus on our own service report from last year, we're actually praised for our approach to performance management and the structure that we have in place in the organisation. And when the National State of Fire report refers to a reduction in activity. We've actually over the last few years seen a 300% increase in the number of safe and wells that our personnel deliver. We've seen a 200% increase in the number of fire safety audits, and there's been a real drive around productivity in the service. So the State of Fire report is very much a broad brush review of the 45 fire and rescue services that have been inspected. Our own review here, where we went from requires improvement in every area to good in every single area, really needs to be our context taken from that report, I think, because the national picture really isn't reflective necessarily of the journey that we've taken here in Nottinghamshire and the progress we've made. There's been a very positive report.
So just to add to what you're saying, Damon, so there's nobody that's been performance management at the fire service based on that report. Is that what you're saying?
Oh no, sorry. So in terms of our productivity,
Yeah.
we were praised in terms of our performance management. So our structures within the service, so things like the CRMP Assurance Board that the Chief chairs, the structures and the clarity that our crews have in terms of what's expected of them, we were definitely praised around that.
Yeah, I suppose you point there about people being performance managed. Is that what you were saying there, Keith?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got well-established HR policies, and we can't get away from the fact that if for whatever reason or another, there's lots of policies in place where if people are unable to do their job, there might be lots of reasons for that. It might be their health. So we see increases in health retirements, for example. We begin to see a trend of that. We've got an ageing workforce. It was predictable as the pensions, things were changing, the physicality of the job around the operational side. And there are people who we have to, part company with because they can no longer do the job for whatever reason. So we absolutely have an appetite for performance management. And I think everybody comes to work with a sense of pride thinking, I need to be my best today. And our aim is to try and help people be their best. I don't want to see anybody go, because getting people in any role these days, once you've got them, you need to keep them. So give you some assurances. I think it's a pretty, well negotiated and well consulted process about how we deal with people. But the wider issue is around, service performance. If I go back to the first inspection that we had, safe and well visits, for example, we were doing 3.3 visits per 1,000 households, I think it was the measure. The national average was 10.4. And some of those services were predominantly on-call services. Now we're above the national average. We moved very quickly. There was a change in process, and this is the tensions I spoke about earlier. The workforce and the culture around what does productivity mean, more for less, or just more and more every year. I've been very clear with the workforce around safe and wells. I think we're an organisation that should be doing 15 to 18,000 per year. We're currently something around 14,000, so we're in that ballpark. And there's certainly no intention just to keep adding 1,000, because I need them doing other things as well.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Lee?
Thank you. On the safe and wellbeing, I honestly think you're doing it wrong, to be honest. I was speaking to the people in Newark, and they were telling me that it takes them so long just to get one person booked in. Now, as a district council, as Michael will know, we've got lists of people that are vulnerable at the district councils and probably the city councils. If you were to make a link with the district, you could probably find a lot of the admin on that could be done for you with lists of people that have the issues, need the visits. They're already on our books. That means a lot of the admin side could be done for you by us.
Yeah, I suppose Damien, in terms of head of service delivery now, he'll probably give you more detail on that, but we've got strong links in terms of local partnerships around our prevention. I look at our persons at risk team and how they do, and the referral pathways go from both the health professionals but also local authority. So there's lots of things in place already. The Charlie profile, in terms of the percentages we used to see it in medium or high risk, that's increasing, so we're obviously hitting the right people. And the report that you received from here that NTU did about the evaluation of Safe and Wells actually predominantly said that the approach we were taking was robust. But if we're missing anything, Councillor, Damien's going to make a note of that, and so just to make sure that we're tapped into the list that you have in terms of vulnerable persons.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to move the recommendation, which is on page 117, which is that we note the contents of the report. Colleagues have to agree that we note the report. To agree? Agree. Thank you very much, colleagues. The final substantive item then is item 12, which I think Mick Charman's going to introduce for us, which is around the mobilisation system update.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The 2004 Fire Services Act states that fire authorities have a statutory and legal duty to ensure that they have processes and systems in place for the receipt of emergency 999 calls. This report has been brought to you to identify some of the current risks and challenges that we are experiencing the current provision of the system that we currently got and the future arrangements around a mobilisation system. Members will be very much aware that currently, in terms of how we meet that statutory duty, we work as a collaborative tri-service approach. We have a mobilisation system that is shared across both Leicestershire, Derbyshire and ourselves, resulting in 2 control rooms. One of those control rooms is our own joint control room, which sits across in Derby and Ascot Drive, and then Leicester have their own control room, which sits in a fire station within Leicester. The current system is provided by a supplier called Sistel. Sistel are a French company with a small satellite office in Yorkshire. There are a number of challenges that we are currently experiencing, both with the current and future provision. I'm just going to take you through the report and talk about some of those challenges and some of the activities that we're undertaking to mitigate some of those challenges. There are 3 essential projects that I'm overseeing at the minute. One of those is the current provision and some of the current challenges. One of them is the disaggregation of the tri-service arrangements, which I'll go further into, and one of them is about the delivery of a replacement mobilising system. In terms of our current provision, we are in a contract with Sistel, the French supplier, up until October 2024. Sistel, currently, due to operating challenges, the global financial challenges, are under the supervision of the French courts. And as a result of that, we are working closely with them to monitor the conditions that have been set on them by the French courts. We continue to work with them to, support them, which is that's obviously in our benefit to support this current supplier, but also key is to monitor and ensure that they're able to deliver to the levels of service that we expect. Also, within the current mobilising system, we continue to work with Sistel to bring about continued improvements. 2 significant improvements that I want to draw your attention to. One of them is a replacement of mobile data terminals. They are essentially computer laptops, with better ways than laptops, but they are a computer system that sits in fire appliances that is crucial to not only the mobilisation of assets that we have at our disposal, but also it's crucial in terms of mapping firefighter safety and ensuring that we can bring an incident to a successful conclusion. We've just gone through a process of procuring new MDTs and we are rolling them out across the service alongside our collaborative partners within Derbyshire and Leicestershire. Also draw your attention to, and one of the challenges we've got in front of us is that the Home Office have stipulated some improvements to the integration between the current mobilising system and the airwave network. There's improvements that have been made or required of us, and not just ourselves, across all fire and rescue sector services, to improve the security elements of that connection, that connectivity. There's a tight deadline of December for that work to be undertaken, and we continue to work with Sistel to be able to deliver that. I move on to the disaggregation of the tri-service. Members will be also aware that earlier this year that Leicester Fire and Rescue Service gave the intentions not to continue past the current contract deadline of October 2024 with the collaborative arrangements that are currently in place. They have taken the decision to separate from ourselves and Derbyshire and are looking at own arrangements as they move forward. If you can imagine the complexity of bringing 3 services together, which was completed back in 2014, well, the disaggregation of those services equally is complex. There are challenges from a financial perspective, there are legal challenges, and there are implications on the way that we work and to the service that we deliver to our communities. So I'm leading a project group that is trying to unpick all that and essentially try and put in place protections for not only yourself as an authority, but also working on behalf of our collaborative partners of Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service. Like I said, there is a working group. This working group does report into a tri-service executive board, which is currently chaired by the Chief Fire Officer, and then it will report in 6 monthly to a members-led collaboration board, which the Chair of the Fire Authority will sit on. Then finally, there is a replacement mobilising system project. This project has been underway since summer 2022. Complications was further added by the fact that Leicester decided to withdraw from that original project. Originally, we moved forward on the basis that it would be 3 services, very similar to the setup that we've got now. However, Leicester's withdrawal has, in some ways, decreased the complexity because it's 2 services, but also added to the challenges in terms of driving forward that project. Because if it's added uncertainty in terms of some of the financial commitments. It's not likely that the financial commitments will be reduced by 1/3, so it will have implications on ourselves in terms of the future budgets that we're required to supply that mobilisation system. A mobilisation system is quite a complex system, and as we reported in the annual report, it's crucial and paramount and critical to the incidents that our frontline workers attend. The joint control, your joint control, receives about 47,000 calls a year. And for ourselves, that equates to about 11,500 incidents we attend. And I'd just like to point out that the joint control just do not answer those calls. They are absolutely central and of paramount importance to the successful conclusion of all operational incidents. They support remotely the incidents, and that's very apparent, and we see the challenges. If we recall some of the challenges of the Grenfell inquiry and how key of a role the joint control is. So the replacement mobilising system is a critical piece of work. There are a number of elements to it. We are out for procurement for 2 of those elements at the minute, 2 of the key principal elements. The procurement process will hopefully enable us to receive bids by the end of the month. It's quite a challenging environment, a market that we're operating within. The demand at the minute, for a number of reasons, is quite high for suppliers. However, the number of suppliers is quite low. As you can imagine, it's quite a complex system. There are only a relatively small number of fire and rescue services that are within the UK. So in terms of suppliers, it's quite small. There is only a small number of suppliers that are able to meet our complex requirements. Chair, I think I've covered the most pertinent points. So happy to take any questions or any.
Thank you very much, Mick. Thanks for a comprehensive update. What's a very complicated issue, but absolutely critical to our response in terms of an emergency service. And thank you for the work you're doing, not just on behalf of us, Mick, but wider partners who clearly impacts us as well. Chief?
Yeah, just add a little bit to what Mick's just sort of said there. We've known this as a growing risk. It's your statutory duty around receiving and mobilising emergency assets. And thankfully, with the permissions of the authority and the chair, you gave me delegated powers where we put Mick in the role. So Mick is part funded by ourselves and Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service. That's come sometimes with a challenge. I know I've had some challenges from my workforce about we're giving jobs to more senior officers rather than employing firefighters. What I can sort of say now, for the last couple of months, I've had this conversation with Mick and I've had the conversation with the Chief Fire Officer in Derbyshire. It's been the first time for about a year we feel like the situation in terms of how we understand it, that we actually feel like we've got a grip of the problem now. It's also a significant funding risk as well. We've put an earmark reserve in. When I look at the increasing costs that suppliers are quoting to us, it's significantly higher than what we thought. And it's important that members kind of understand it's your statutory duty. we've now got somebody who advises and guides both authorities, and I'm thankful actually it's a Nottinghamshire officer. The control room is in Derbyshire, so there's that kind of distance, although we are close, but it's a Nottinghamshire officer that's advising and guiding both. And from what I've seen so far, the investment in both authorities has been absolutely significant and really, really useful. So hopefully give you some confidence. It's a complicated thing, and certainly some of the questions, particularly Councillor Rain, some of the questions around where we're spending money, and sometimes it can be seen quite, why we're doing that over there. There's a really good reason. The risk is significant to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mick. Any comments or questions? Councillor Upton, and then Councillor Rain, and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I get it. This is a key risk, is it not? Because I mean, it's fundamental, in my perspective, that receiving calls and actioning them is pretty key to what you do. And so I'm pleased that the Sistel system risk, if you like, has been mitigated further by the French courts extending it to September or whenever. I just have at the back of my mind, but what if they hadn't? I mean, is there a plan B? So that's the first question, and hopefully they will carry on extending until such time as we have a replacement supplier. And the report talks about clause 214, the new supplier will be announced September, October this year. Good. And 3.2 says until the new contract is awarded. I'm not sure it says actually when you anticipate that, but presumably autumn, winter of this year, or certainly this calendar year. And you've touched on the indicative figure of £2 million, indicative. I don't know if you could reassure me. Is that £2 million our share, or between the three, or is it between us and Derbyshire? I mean, you get the logic. If it's £2 million to us, and that could be an underestimate, or is it £2 million to be shared between Notts and Derby? I think that's it, really. A couple of questions there.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. In response to the first bit of the question, is that quite right, we continue to work with Sistel to monitor the situation, but we also continue in the background to look at what contingency and BCM, business continuity management plans we've got in place in the event that Sistel was to cease to operate. It's worth pointing out we have appointed a solicitor to support and advise us on our responsibilities and what we can do with regards to the procurement of a new replacement mobiliser system, and what are our and their obligations as part of the current contract. The French courts system is slightly different to ours. They are in this redressement judiciaire, which it doesn't quite translate across to the English law in terms of it's not quite administration. Yeah, it's not quite, and the advice that we've given, it's not quite that. It is a supportive mechanism. So we are working with them to make it, to ensure that they are still a viable option as we move forward. And even to the cases that they will be one of the suppliers that submit a bid for the new mobilising system. Yeah. So they are in that position. They are under the supervision. They are being supported, and they're being helped through the current challenges they've got. But they feel confident that they will be in a position post September hopefully with the supervision of the French courts. We're also engaged with a contract extension with Sistel, and this is through the advice of our appointed solicitors. There are a number of options we can take, but we're currently in those negotiations. With regards to the impact on finances, the £2 million that has been identified in the capital programme is only our contribution. It is an indicative figure because there are a number of solutions that can be provided to us. Without getting too complex, is that some of the systems are that we host the equipment, and the other way is that the system is hosted on the cloud. Now, depending on which one is preferable, which one will be evaluated as most preferable, that will very much depend on the impact on the finances. If it's a capital process, if it's a cloud-based system, that is heavily led on revenue costs. If it's a system that we have on our premises, that is very much a capital-based funding stream.
Just to add to that, the £2 million was an estimate in the budget figures in February, but we acknowledged at the time that with Leicestershire withdrawing, it's likely to be higher than that, and it could be significantly higher. But until we get the bids in and we know what type of system it is, I haven't updated it until I've got proper figures in the autumn. So it will come through in next year's budgets.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Upton?
It does. A quick supplementary.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Are you at liberty to say if any of your tenderers are UK?
There is a mix of UK and international suppliers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Councillor Rain and then Councillor Butler.
It's been partly covered by Councillor Upton's question, to be honest with you. I wanted, in terms of Sistel, I was concerned, because when it says under the French Court financial operating charges, and I won't do the pronunciation, although it's Bastille Day today, isn't it? So, well, if they're watching it, happy Fête de Bastille. About the administration and whether that's going to affect them, but you've already said it's going to be supported. I'm concerned, and I suppose you will be, because it's quite stressful. It's a really detailed report. I don't envy your job there, and it's not our problem. But in terms of, like Becky's just said, how much this is going to cost with Leicestershire pulling out, and that is an unknown, isn't it? And with the situation we're in that we talked about earlier on, I don't need to repeat, that's a real concern. Yeah. But I will actually echo Councillor Upton's point there about a UK firm. I'd like to see us employing people in the UK if we could do. I'm not being nationalistic about it, but you try and support jobs as best you can, can't you?
Yeah, I suppose the very short comment would be that whilst we have got suppliers that are based in the UK, it's hard to say. I've been truthfully honest, they are international suppliers. We're such a small market. In terms of there is 44 UK fire and rescue services, and for the degree of complexity and the costs associated with the supply of a system, it's quite understandable that they are seeking international markets to be able to be viable suppliers.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Councillor Rain. Councillor Butler.
Well, thank you. It seems to me, and I'm quite new to this, but Leicestershire's decision is causing an extraordinary amount of work and challenge for you and colleagues. And I presume at some point you and Derbyshire have informed them of this. And do we know why? I mean, without going, I'm sure they have their reasons. It's probably not ultimately none of our business, but it seems very unfortunate. But I presume as well that have we been worried or were we planning towards any potential impact on cross-border work? So especially, I mean, being slightly parochial, if I'm honest, where my part of Nottinghamshire borders part of Leicestershire, so when calls come in, I presume that is a key consideration, isn't it? Sort of how that's impacted.
Yeah, you're totally right, Councillor. One of the significant benefits of the collaborative working that we've been undertaking as we have currently and the Tri-Service is the benefits to the communities. That benefit is that it's almost borderless mobilising. Any one of the two control rooms, whether that's in Leicester or the one in Derby, can receive and take calls from anywhere across the three communities. And as a consequence, they can. Leicester could receive a call from us now and mobilise Highfields Fire Station to that call. They could do that, and it's seamless.
Seamless.
Yeah. Unfortunately, post October, at least October 2024, that will not be the case in terms of the border of Leicester and Nottinghamshire.
Just give you some reassurance. The Fire Services Act has sections 13, 16 for making arrangements for and providing mutual assistance. So we used to mobilise over border before. It doesn't mean that fire appliances are going to stop when it comes to a county border. In terms of communities, and Vale of Eve is probably the place where I'd sort of say Leicestershire may have you know, it may be their jurisdiction in some parts of it, but we actually mobilise places like Bingham, for example. So the ways of working will be different. It may take a little bit longer to do it, who knows, because systems have moved on. But we have a statutory duty to support one another.
Oh, I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to cause unnecessary panic, but I was just
No.
But you can understand people might be a little bit concerned when we read something like this. But well, I'm sure we've made our views very clear to your colleagues in Leicestershire. Probably not for repeating here.
We've got a really good relationship with Leicestershire. You know.
Oh, right.
As you would imagine, you in the future will want to make decisions that may go against the operations that you've currently got.
I get that.
It just doesn't fit now, and you know, I respect their decisions. They will respect ours.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Have we got any contract liabilities now due to this agreement being withdrawn or whatsoever? Is there any financial issues that we're going to suffer, and if so, are we taking legal advice on that?
Yeah, Councillor, there is a collaborative agreement that is established as part of the tri-service arrangements. We have sought clarification, we have sought legal advice regarding those liabilities. No current liabilities are expected because Leicester do intend to see out their current contract with Sistel. And there afterwards it's a new set of arrangements. So the liability, there might be some small costs, but those costs will be identified, and they will be through discussions they will be identified to Leicester what the consequence of their decisions, but liabilities are very minimal.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Councillor Hollis.
I'm not going to speak for long because we've all been here a long time, but obviously this is quite an important issue. You'll appreciate we've got a lot of independent colleagues across that part of the county. What actually will happen then? So you get a call from, let's say, if I use both examples, you get a call from a village in the Vale of Beaver. Do we still respond, and how will that differ?
Yeah.
And obviously more pressing for actually what we're responsible for. You get a call from Bingham.
Yeah.
And obviously traditionally maybe the clients attended from Leicestershire. How will that differ to now?
Similar sort of arrangements that we have with other bordering fire and rescue services. What would happen now is that if a call was received for assistance that sat outside of the county, a judgment would be made if we think we need to be able to still mobilise to that particular call, or whether the call warranted us that we'd pass to the other fire and rescue service. There are different ways that we will explore how that can be achieved, but as an example, the way that it would work for Lincoln is that they would take the details of whatever the incident may be. They would then decide to respond to it or not, and then they would pass the information via, there's two methods. They could do it via telephone, a dedicated line, or they could do it via what we'd call a hailing group, which is a radio talk group. They would pass the details, and we would then respond accordingly. So, that
all sounds like it takes a long time.
Unfortunately, Councillor, it does take longer than the current.
How much longer normally? So obviously Lincolnshire is a great example.
Yeah, it depends on the complexity of the incident, and depends upon the response of the hosting fire service that takes the call. I would average anything between 60 seconds to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Thank you, Mick. Any other comments or questions? No. The recommendation then is on page 123, which is to update members on activities for the current tri-service and replacement call handling and mobilisation system. And a huge thank you, Mick, for the hard work that you're doing, and that members note the contents of the report is the recommendation. So I'll move that. Do we have a second? Is that agreed? Thank you very much, colleagues. Our final item on the agenda then is item 13, which is our committee outcomes, which have been circulated to you in the separate red pack. Are there any comments or questions in relation to the minutes? Committee outcomes? No? People happy to note them? Yeah. Agreed? Thank you very much, colleagues. That is the end of the formal meetings. I'll close formal business. Thank you for everybody attending, and have a nice weekend. And please stay